Okay, so looking at our 9/11 introduction, what I've given you is a plot charting diagram, just like we've done before. But the difference with this one is that we're not going to follow a narrative yet. We're going to help lay out a narrative, okay? In this narrative, our climax is actually going to be the fall of the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers. Okay, so I tell you right now what you want to have for your climax, and you can go ahead and even add this in now, is that the climax to our plot charting graphic organizer is going to be the highest point is going to be the collapse of the World Trade Center and collapse of the World Trade Center from the plane striking it. Okay. Now, a lot of you have probably heard some of the background to 9/11, but we're going to look at a little bit more in detail. Okay. The reason why we're going to look at it a little bit more in detail is because this is how nonfiction narratives get laid out. Does that make sense? So in the exposition and the conflict, the rising action, you should be able to map out exactly what people go through up to that point and then after. Does that make sense? All right. So the first place that I would start is the September 11th infographic. Okay. That would be right here. I would start there. Okay. It has some key facts, but it also has some of the lead information going into the start of the day of 9/11. And I can tell you, I'm one of those people that can remember exactly where I was at whenever this happened. I mean, I was literally walking out of the shower, getting ready to go to my favorite class in the political science class. And someone was like, Lloyd, you don't have to go to class. Come in here real quick. And I was like, what are you talking about? Walked in and I was like, okay, this is the way the day is going to start. Okay. So if you look at the main characters, right? If you look at the main characters, and this is kind of how your exposition is going to be laid out. All right. You can see involved, there's 4 planes. I know that's weird to think about the fact that these 4 planes are characters, but there was a lot of people acting in that situation that did not have any part in it, right? They just kind of got wrapped into the fact that they happened to be passengers on that plane. There's 19 terrorists. We're not going to name them by name because, one, there's a lot of them, and I don't expect you to know that, but there was 19 terrorists. The locations, you know, one of them is the World Trade Center, right? You're starting to see how this is already laying out for you. Some of you are already starting to type because it makes sense that if you use this plot charting graphic organizer, you can actually start to figure those things out, can't you? So if I actually take this, I can actually start filling in. I know I gave you the climax already, but I can start filling in these details. And that's exactly what I want you to do. When did this happen? Well, you know it's 9/11. Does anyone know the year? 2001. Okay. So we know the exact date when this happened. Where at? One was New York City. One's in Pennsylvania with the Pentagon. Well, I'm sorry. One is in Pennsylvania. The other one is at the Pentagon. Okay. So again, if you look at the settings, it gives a really good idea. And they tell you directly Stony Creek Township, Pennsylvania, right here on your sheet. Okay. This infographic is a really good way to organize kind of how this broke down in the simple facts. Now, I don't expect all of this information to then get translated over to your plot charting graphic organizer, right? I want you to simplify it and look at it. You'll be able to work with each other on this as well, but I want to help get you started. And also give you some basic background information that you may or may not already know. Looking at the World Trade Center, it even shows you how many escaped, how many ended up dying, how many were on the flight when it hit. Okay. And it's crazy to think, one, the details of what you're actually looking at, right? If you look at the World Trade Center, it was 1 acre squared all the way up for as many flights as the building went up. I think it's actually listed. When the towers collapsed, they fell nearly 1/4 of a mile to earth and reached a speed of 120 miles per hour. Evacuation below the impact zones was a success. So where the impact is, where you see it at, you can see that 4 people died south of that. 72 people died south of the impact area. But look at the number that occurred above. Think of the lucky 18 people that escaped the south tower from above the impact site. Okay, so right now, one of our major conflicts going into this is what? Okay, the planes get hijacked, and then what happened with them? They crashed them into the World Trade Centers, the Pentagon, and I think that's one conflict, right? You're looking at one major conflict right there. The planes are hijacked. They're hijacked. They're flown into the Twin Towers. They're flown into the World Trade Center. Does that make sense so far? Yeah, that's just one conflict. And that's what I want you guys to see about the conflict, is that you can't just put one thing that occurred with it, like the planes got hijacked. Well, there's other things tied into the planes getting hijacked, right? They hijacked the planes, and then what did they do with those planes? That's still part of the same conflict. Okay. And that was one area of struggle that we had within our first couple of plot charting graphic organizers. Okay, so let's look at over here at the timeline of September 11th. You see where that's laid out with United Airlines Flight 175 departs Boston for Los Angeles. American Airlines Flight 11 departs Boston for Los Angeles. United States Flight 93 leaves Newark for San Francisco. American Airlines Flight 77 departs Washington for Los Angeles. You notice where every one of these planes was headed? Where was their initial destination? Boston to Los Angeles, Boston to Los Angeles, Newark to San Francisco, Washington to Los Angeles. They're headed somewhere in California, right? 3 of them to Los Angeles, 1 to San Francisco. Why would they choose long distance flights like that? Possibly because they can pick more places. Ella, what were you saying? They have more time, right? Because they wouldn't, once they clear what they call airspace, the city where they're leaving, they'd have more time until they had to radio again for any other kind of checkpoint. So once they leave Newark, they leave Boston, they leave Washington, D.C., there's lots of time in between that they wouldn't be on the radio at all. They would just be flying like normal. So these hijackers picked long distance flights on purpose. Okay. Then as you get into 8:46, so the first plane leaves just before 8 o'clock, and they all leave by 8:10. But within 45 minutes, Flight 11 crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. I still think we're in that first conflict, right? And then Flight 175 crashes into the South Tower by 9:03, 8:03 our time. Right at that moment, once those 2 flights have crashed, do we have any new conflicts that have started? Okay, so the airport shut down, right? Okay, the airport shut down because that's what it says at 9:21. What about the people in the buildings? At the same time, once the airports are shut down, they identify there's a problem. Those 2 planes have crashed. And they're trying to do what? They've got to get out, right? So right as conflict 1 ends, we're right into conflict number 2, where people are trying to escape. They shut down the airports. They start to take measures into their own hands, right? And try to avoid any kind of problems. Are you guys starting to see how this breaks down a little bit? Okay. Because I'm going to turn you loose here in just 1 second. Now, as you look at September 11th,